everybody, this is ASMR Angel Reads. We're continuing with chapter 4 of Daggerspell. This is the last section of chapter 4, and then I'll take us an intermission for a couple of days, and then we'll start chapter 5. Anyway, we'll just pick up where we left off. Oh, I need my glasses. The High Lords of Water had promised Nevin another storm which broke on schedule the following day. A nice gentle rain that would properly soak the fields. In spite of the weather, Nevin bundled himself up in a cloak and rode up to Merrick's fort. It was time for him to sound Guerin and Lysa about taking Addern in a formal apprenticeship. Besides, he wanted to take a look at the nasty situation Kata had so inadvertently described. As he rode into the ward, where the cobbles were running with rain, Addern came dashing to meet him with a cloak pulled over his head. "I've been watching for you. I just knew you'd come today. And here I am, going to help me stable my horse." Together they found an empty stall and tied Nevin's horse up out of the weather. While Nevin took off the damp saddle, Addern leaned back against the wall and watched, his big eyes full of some question. "What's on your mind, lad?" "I want to ask you somewhat. How did you make the rain come?" "Here, what makes you think I did?" "I saw you in a dream. You were sitting on a river bank and there was a big star around you. It was like fire, but blue. Then these kings came to you and you talked to them. There were 4 kings. I saw the one who was dripping wet. Then it rained." Nevin sighed. His last doubt that Addern was his apprentice vanished. "I was invoking the wind and asking it to blow. The king of air was quarreling with the king of fire, and the king of earth asked me to settle the quarrel. It's like the high king of Devery giving a judgment to warning lords." "And are you the high king then?" "I am not, just a way of speaking to make it clear." "Were the kings angry at us too?" "They weren't. Why do you think so?" "Because we could have starved if there wasn't any rain. Da said so." "Oh, Da was right, but the kings of the wildlands don't know that, you see. Truly, I doubt if they care. They have so little to do with us that we look to them like field mice do to us, say. If you found a starving field mouse, would you feed it? But do you course the fields to see if the mice need your help?" Addern laughed aloud. "Now listen carefully," Nevin went on. "I've come to speak to your father. You need to decide if you want to come with me in the spring and learn all the things I know. It's a big thing. Someday we'll have to leave Bladerbeer, and you won't see your ma or da again for a long time. But we'll come back to visit someday. We will for visits." Addern balanced on one foot and twisted the other around behind it. He chewed on his lower lip, a skinny little boy suddenly frightened. But when he looked up, a man's soul, the man he would someday be, looked out of his eyes for the briefest moment as the 2 levels of his mind merged to make the most important decision of his life. "I don't want to go, but I know I will. I want to know things so much, Nevin. It's like wanting water when it's all hot outside. You've just got to get some." "So it is. Done then." The great hall was crowded and smoky with torchlight in the rainy, dark day. At the front of the hall, Guerin sat cross-legged on a table, his harp in his lap, and sang with sweat running down his face. The men gazed up at him attentively while he recited a tale of a cattle raid and named member after member of the war band in decorated stanzas. "We'd better just go see Ma'am," Addern said. "She's upstairs." As they went up the spiral staircase, Guerin's pure liquid tenor followed them, chanting of glory. In the bard's chamber it was mercifully cool and quiet. One of the shutters hung open to let the streak of gray light in. Lysa sat near it with a sewing in her lap. Although she smiled as she greeted them, Nevin saw that she was troubled. About Tannic, he assumed. For a few moments they chatted idly while he studied her with a real greed. not for her pretty body, but for her soul looking out of her eyes, for the company she would have been, the end to his loneliness. Well, here, Lysa said at last, surely you didn't come all this way to talk about Rain. I didn't, but about Adern. He shows real talent for Erdman's trade, and I was wondering if you and your husband would consider apprenticing him to me. I want to go, Mom, Adern broke in. Hush, we'll have to talk this over with your dad. Here, Nevin, I know perfectly well this means he'd have to travel with you. I'm not sure I can let him go. Ma'am, Adern wailed, out with you then if you can't sit quiet. Go listen to your father for a while. Whining and reluctant, Adern dragged himself out of the chamber and slammed the door behind him. Lysa settled back in her chair and looked Nevin over thoughtfully. I've already lost one child. Two seems a bit too much to ask. I know, but he'll be leaving you anyway for some kind of apprenticeship sooner or later. I doubt me if he'll ever be a bard like his father. Here, do you doubt that I'll take good care of him? Lysa considered, and as their eyes met, she remembered again a little flicker of puzzled recognition. Well, I don't, but will I ever see him again? Of course, we'll write back regularly for visits. That's some comfort, I suppose. Here, I'll tell you somewhat, because you're the only man I've ever met who might understand it. When Adern was born, I had the strangest feeling about him. I knew what someday he'd leave me for a truly strange weird indeed. It was my first time, of course, and truly I was so tired and sick and just glad it was over. So the midwife lay Otto on my breast, and he looked up at me with eyes that saw. Most babies are like puppies, nuzzling at your breast with cloudy little eyes. But Adern saw. I knew he could just see where he was, and he was glad of it. And I thought then that he was marked for a strange weird. Do you think me daft? I don't. I've no doubt it's the plain truth. Lysa sighed and looked out the window where the rain fell soft and steady. Herbs, she said. Is that all you'll teach him? A bit more than that, truly. Tell me, what do you think of Dwemer? A tale fit for the Guerin's songs and nothing more? A bit more than that, truly, Lysa smiled conscientiously, echoing his words. So I thought, if that's the truth of it, well, there's no way I can stand between him and his weird. It would be a harsh thing if you tried for all of us. Nodding, Lysa stared at the rain. Will you wait until spring, she said, her voice catching. He's such a little lad. I will, and we won't ride far next summer. You'll see him in the fall. Tears ran down her cheeks. Nevin wanted to kneel at her feet, to call her Bragawin and beg her forgive him. He decided that he could stay in Bladderbeer, never take her son away, and never leave her. The Dwemer warning hit him like a slap. Just as he did, she had the weird fulfilled that he could no more soften than he could his own. And what will happen if you stay, he told himself. You'll hate Guerin for having her. Shall I leave you alone? Please, my thanks. Nevin went down the spiral staircase and lingered in its shadow to watch the great hall. Over by the servants' hearth, Adern was playing a game of Carnock with one of the pages. Guerin was singing a ballad from the dawn time, the sad tale of Lady Maeva and Lord Benwick and their adulterous love. Adultery. Nevin felt the Dwemer warning and looked around for Tannic, who was sitting with the riders and watching the bard with a tight, insolent smile. Every now and then Guerin would glance his way with a smile of his own. Odd ye gods, Nevin thought. I'm too late. Guerin knows. Stanza after stanza reeled out until Guerin came to the climax. Benwick lay dead at the outraged husband's feet, and Tannic got up and strode out of the great hall. With a sigh, Guerin set the harp down and wiped his sweaty face on his sleeve. Then he got off the table, took a tankard of ale from a page, and wandered over to Nevin. I need a bit of risk. Cursed smoky in here, and it affects your voice. So it must. You sing beautifully, bard, though I wonder about your choice of tales. Guerin raised one eyebrow. Lord Benwick's sad end fell upon some ears that are doubtlessly raw from hearing it, Nevin said. I only wish I could cut them from his head, if you mean the man I think you mean. takes a great deal of skill with a sword to bring a falcon down as he flies, my friend. And that's what all men think, isn't it? Guerin's voice turned cold and flat. That I'm to grovel in fear before this lout of a rider because he can swing a blade and I can't? I tell you, I'd rather die than be that kind of coward. Only pray your words never come to rest. Guerin shrugged and had a long swallow of ale. Now here, Nevin said, if you mention to Lord Merrick that Tannic is sniffing around your woman, the Lord would turn him out. Merrick honors a bard the way he should be honored. So he does, but that would only dirty Lysa's name. I can hear the old gossips wagging their heads and saying there's mud, there's water below, and stinking warband looking at her and wondering, what kind of a man am I if I can't protect my own? A dead man protects nobody. Oh, don't trouble your heart. I have no desire to die and leave my poor Lysa a widow. This is all a warning light for our falcon. I truly think the lout didn't know I knew. Well, he does now. I'll put him in his place. It was perfectly reasonable, but Nevin knew with an icy touch of Dwemer that somehow Guerin was lying. As he went over his stock of story songs laid up in his mind where no thief could steal them, Guerin was surprised at just how many tales had adultery for a theme. It seemed to be a common pastime among the noble-borns like hawking, though with an even bloodier result. Every night Guerin would sing one song about adultery and watch Tannic when he came to the predictable doom at the end. From the tightness of his jaw and the cold flicker in his eyes, there was no doubt that Tannic was listening. Tannic wasn't the only man with a sharp ear. After a week at this point, Dorian came up to Guerin one night for a private talk. Here, Bard, how about a pleasant tale or two? I'm as sick as I can be of all these lusting after other men's wives. Are you now, Captain? So am I. Dorian winced, tossing his head like a fly-strung horse. Do you think I'm blind? Guerin said. My apologies. It's a shameful thing, truly wanting another man's woman. Just that. I'm glad to see you share my opinion. Is there anything wrong with me making a shameful man feel shame? Nothing at all, and it's the bard's prerogative at that. The next time Guerin sang one of his tales, he had the satisfaction of seeing the rest of the warband avoiding Tannic's eyes at the mention of adultery. For the next few nights, Tannic glowered into his tankard and barely breathed during the crucial song. When he judged the time was right, Guerin sang a bawdy song about adulterous Miller who thought he was close to seducing the tavern man's wife. All the time the wife had been confiding in her husband, who was there with two strong friends to greet this would-be swain. They clapped the miller into an empty barrel, rolled him down the village street, and sent him adrift in the river. When the other riders howled with laughter, Tannic's face went dead white. The very next morning, Tannic met Guerin face to face in the ward. You little bastard, Tannic growled. Am I now? And what injury have I ever done you? Trapped, Tannic could hardly admit his own guilt by mentioning the choice of songs. If you have an injury, Guerin went on, by all means lay it before Lord Merrick for judgment. I'll gladly accept his decree. Tannic turned scarlet, spun on his heel, and strode off. Guerin smiled after his retreating back. You fool, he thought. A bard has weapons stronger than steel, although he knew that Merrick would settle the matter quietly if only he asked. Guerin wanted more. Getting rid of Tannic wasn't enough vengeance. That very night, after still another tale of adultery gone wrong, Guerin begged Merrick's leave to sing a new song of his own composing about the hunting in the summer, since he loved hunting, and of course the Lord agreed. As Guerin turned up the harp, he saw Tannic was relaxed over a tankard of ale, and doubtless thinking his mockery over for the night. Guerin began to sing about flying hawks out in the meadow where the falcons fly the highest of all and swoop down on pretty birds for sport. The warband fell silent, watching Tannic, whose hands gripped his tankard so hard his knuckles were white. Guerin went on singing about the pretty white dove whom a little lad in the town loved for a pet, but the cruel hunter launched his falcon for her. Greedy to rend her in his claws, the falcon chased her all over the field, while her little heart was breaking in fear as she fluttered pathetically ahead. Just as the falcon was about to strike, up from the hedgerow sprang the lad who loved her and shot the falcon through the heart with an arrow. And the pretty white dove fluttered safe to her love, Guerin sang, and then broke off mid-line. White as a dove, Tannic sprang from his seat and strode down the hall. Guerin set his harp aside and gave him a mild nod. "You bastard," Tannic whispered, "that's enough." "Enough of what? There's a fair bit more of song to come, my friend." Tannic drew his sword and swung it in one smooth motion, but Guerin was ready. He threw himself backwards off the table as the hall broke into shouting. Guerin tumbled inelegantly into the straw and scrambled up in time to see the warband mobbing Tannic. They tackled him, threw him down, and disarmed him. Lord Merrick was on his feet, yelling for order as the maidservants screamed. At last the hall was quiet. Servants pressed back against the wall. A few women were weeping. Twisting his arm tight behind him, 3 men hauled Tannic to his feet. "What's all this?" Merrick snapped. "Have you gone daft, drawing your sword on my bard, and him unarmed at that?" In the comrade's arms, Tannic was shaking too hard to answer. Guerin stepped forward and did his best to look bewildered. "If you dislike the song as much as all that, you might simply have told me." "You bastard," Tannic shouted. "You little bastard. You planned all this. You've been working on me for days." "Hold your tongue," Merrick snarled, stepping closer. "And why would the bard do such a thing?" The last piece of the trap sprung shut. Desperately, Tannic looked this way and that as if he were begging someone to help him. Afraid to earn a bard's revenge, the white-faced riders stayed silent. "Ill temper is one thing, impiety another," Merrick went on. "I hate to do this, but the laws are the laws. Take him out and hang him. Do it now. I want it over with." Tannic went as limp in his captor's arms as if he were going to faint. By the hearth, Kata screamed, burst out weeping, and went running for the staircase. "It's a hard thing, truly," Merrick remarked to all and sundry, "but no man draws on my bard and lives to boast about it. Does anyone here dare quibble over my judgment?" When everyone shook their heads in a terrified no, Merrick nodded in satisfaction. "Go on, hang him. Take the torches and shove him high off the wall. No use letting him brood about it all night. I want it over and done with." Shouting a war cry, Tannic made a desperate struggle, breaking free and hitting out barehanded at his captors. Doubtless he was hoping they'd cut him down with a sword, but the warband wrestled him to the floor and bound him hand and foot. As they dragged him away, Guerin had to exert all his will to keep from smiling. By 2 hours after dawn, the news was all over Bladbeard that Lord Merrick had hanged one of his riders for threatening his bard. When Nevin heard it, his first reaction was that he wasn't surprised Geraint would be such a dolt. Then he remembered that Tannic wasn't truly Geraint, and that Guerin had more brains than ever Blaine did. Swearing under his breath, Nevin ran to the saddle to saddle his horse. Mercifully, they'd taken Tannic's body down from the wall by the time Nevin arrived. The servant who took his horse told him that since the priest refused to say last rites over the hanged man, Tannic was already buried in an unmarked grave behind the dun. Nevin sought out Guerin, whom he found up in the chamber alone. "The women are taking the lads for a long walk," Guerin said. "They're all upset over this trouble." "No doubt. I take it Tannic took your warning a bit much to heart?" Guerin merely smiled. "Now here," Nevin snarled, "why didn't you just have a word with Lord Merrick?" "Because I wanted Tannic dead. Ye gods, did you ever doubt otherwise?" Nevin let out a breath and an explosive little puff. You're a clever little murderer, fit for one of your own ballads. My thanks. Are you going to tell Merrick? And do you think he'd believe a word of what I said? But it's your weird, my friend, and truly you'll have to pay for this some day." "Where, in the shadowy other lands?" Guerin smiled so smugly that Nevin felt like slapping him. Here Guerin had been given a chance to free himself from the tangled weird that he shared with Garrett. He could have let the past slip by honorably and used laws to send his enemy far away from his woman. Instead, he'd used the law like a sword. Sooner or later, Nevin said, this murder will come round to you again. Will it now? I'll take that chance. Nevin's mouth ached for wanting to tell him the truth that he was forbidden to tell unasked in this life. You may be safe enough, but in your next or the next after that, sooner or later this blood will fall on your head. You'll still be bound to Garrett by a chain of blood. And suddenly Nevin was afraid. Would he still be bound to them too, simply because he might have seen Guerin's mind in a previous murder? It was 2 days before Nevin saw Lysa when he brought Adern back to the dun, and she met them at the gates and sent the boy off with Kata. Leading his horse, Nevin strode with her down the grassy hill in the strong sunlight. She was pale and haggard from the sleepless nights. I want to tell you that Guerin's decided to apprentice Addo to you. You'll need to discuss the details, but the matter's settled. Once Guero makes up his mind, it's done. He's a stubborn man, truly. When Lysa winced, he realized that she knew perfectly well what had happened. Forgive an old man, his business. No need for apologies. All you got, it aches my heart, but what can I say? Guero only did it to protect me. Well, true spoken, no man in the warband will be stupid enough to trouble you after this. Lysa nodded, looking away to the distant view where the Nair sparkled in the afternoon haze. He's a good man, my husband. Nevin sighed, thinking that she had to believe it. I know how lucky I am, she went on. It aches my heart sometimes thinking that I was lucky to pick him. What? It should gladden your heart. All men would think so, truly, but ye gods, it sickened me this whole time. There I was hiding in my chamber like a scared infant, and all the while thinking I was lucky that my man believed the truth, lucky that I had a good man to protect me. Her eyes snapping, Lysa turned to face him. I'm sick to my heart of depending on luck. I wish I had a man's power, and then luck could go back to the Lord of Hell. Hold your tongue. That sort of wish has a way of turning dangerous. With a little shrug, Lysa went back to watch the view as if she were seeing a distant future there. Okay, that's the end of chapter 4. Like I said, I'm probably going to take a couple days off before chapter 5, but we'll recap when I come back. Thanks for watching. Bye.